Now, This Week in Texoma.
Welcome to the program. Dr. Tom Deighan, the Superintendent of Schools for the Lawton Public School District, is our guest today. And if you've been following the news at all over the past several weeks, you know the challenges that school districts all over the state are facing because of the budget crisis at the legislature. So we thought it'd be a good time to talk with Dr. Deighan about some of the things that Lawton Public School District is doing. Dr. Deighan, good to have you back.
Good to be here, David.
It's been a challenge, to say the least, right? I mean, this year, whenever you kind of go to work every day, do you check out what's going on with the legislature and see, oh, if we've got another revenue failure that's coming our way that we're going to have to deal with? What's it been like at Shoemaker Center this season?
Well, if you're working in schools,
right,
there can be a lot of uncertainty.
Right.
The legislature, you know, they're good and well-intentioned people. They're wrestling with a tough problem, and so they're doing the best they can. We're trying to do the best we can. So everybody right now is trying to guess where we're going to be July 15th. Mm-hmm. It's essentially what we're looking at. Where are we going to be August 1st? And so you kind of have to be a financial prognosticator.
Right.
You have to take all this advice, and you have to also accept the fact that people out there are giving you the best information they have, but they may not know things either. And so everything I say right now at this time of the year in a year like this has to be based on, so far, what we know at the moment.
Right.
This is what we can say. And I have to trust that people are mature and engaged enough to say, okay, they understand. There are a lot of things out of my control. Right. But so far, you know, that's the prefix that we put on everything right now.
About, what, 6-8 weeks, I guess, left in the school year now,
right,
something like that. So hopefully, you know, everything that has kind of been put in place, but we know some of our friends at Flower Mound and Cache and a couple of the area schools have decided to kind of shorten their school year a little bit. You came out with an announcement the other day about knocking off a couple of Fridays in May,
right,
but you said that didn't have anything to do budget-wise. I might clarify for some people that might not have quite understood the rationale behind that.
Right. Some schools have closed their Fridays in order to save money. It doesn't really save us money. Mm-hmm. Unless we send people home and not pay them, we don't save any money. It's a wash at best. We've already committed to pay people for a certain amount for this year, and I think that's a commitment we have to keep. Mm-hmm. When we decided to close schools and when we requested, I'd started receiving requests from staff about we had not used any of our snow days, which in the time I've been here is an anomaly.
Right.
We used all of our snow days the last 2 years. As a matter of fact, we had issues. We had a couple schools that we had to do something creative things.
Yeah. And
it just seemed like a reasonable request. And in a year when staff has been so stressed, not necessarily just by the job, but just by the uncertainty in the air,
right,
it seemed reasonable. Let's do everything we can to end this year as smoothly as possible. Mm-hmm. And the end of the year is when educators and staff and students get stressed.
Right.
And then with the other thing, let's get everything we can wrapped up this year and start the next year as smooth as possible. Mm-hmm. So that's the whole reasoning behind it. Mm-hmm. It's to give our staff a little bit extra time at the end of this year to get their semester tests done, mm-hmm, to wrap up their grading, and then, just as importantly, what do we need to get in place for next August? Mm-hmm. Anything we can do, because I don't know if everybody remembers, we started school next year. We're starting next year a week earlier, mm-hmm, in order to give us more time of instruction before we're tested. Mm-hmm. And so anything we can do now to make that transition to end this year smoother and start next year smoother, I think it's going to be a blessing to our students, staff, and parents.
Let's talk about the budget situation in terms of how you have been trying to prepare for this. A year ago, had to make some tough decisions regarding some elementary schools, closed 4. There were some of the smaller schools, and nobody likes to see their neighborhood school go away. No. Take us back to that time, because that was a difficult time, but it was one of those decisions that was a difficult one, but you and the board figured that was one of the good ways to maybe hedge against some of the problems that we're dealing with now a year later, right?
Yeah. A year ago, oil prices were falling pretty rapidly. Mm-hmm. We had been in that spike and that kind of pattern for a while. We had done everything we could through attrition, and really we had to make a decision. Do we wait for another year and have to make decisions that may have to be even more drastic, or do we act as prudently as we can at the moment? And fortunately, the board did support the decision, and we moved forward with closing 4 schools, about 800 students. And that was an extremely tough decision. I met with the parents. Tough decision. Since in the last 18 months, we've lost about 500 students in the district. Our enrollment has shrunk that much. Mm-hmm. So the decision has turned out to be a good one. for financial reasons and everything else. Because at the time I said it was never about this school year. It was
Right.
about the one that's coming up.
Right.
And because we made that decision, because our board had the foresight to make a tough decision, we're not scrambling right now. There are districts around the state making some very tough last-minute decisions. Instead of doing that, we tried to be proactive, and as a result, it looks like, with everything we know so far, that decision has helped save jobs in this district. I do not have to look at families and say, you know, you're not going to have a job here, and I don't have to look at kids and say, you know, your favorite teacher or cook won't be seeing you next year. That is the blessing, and for that I'm eternally grateful to this community for seeing the need to do it, to the board for having the courage to do it, and again, I'm thankful to the parents and students and staff that it impacted, because they bore, it was tough for them, but it has turned out to be the right decision.
Have you been able to get a handle on what's happening with this leakage of students from the school system?
No, I don't know where, I don't know if Lawton, if the population is shifting. I don't know
Right.
what's happening.
Right.
But the simple truth is, you know, from this point last year to now, we've lost about 300 students. And in the last 18 months, about 500 students. Our population is just
It's changing.
is changing in Lawton. And in order to be able to keep serving our students at a certain level, we have to make sure that our number of facilities and our resources stay in a manageable level. Otherwise, you know, we're faced making a last-minute decision that doesn't benefit us for a couple years. The decision we made a year ago now will benefit us next year.
Right.
It hasn't helped this year, but next year, when we need it, we're going to see the benefits of it.
Give us some hard numbers in terms of how much money that you've lost. I mean, we hear, okay, 8% or this. Give us some numbers in terms of what's been lost over the past year, couple of years.
This year, we expect to have $3.5 million loss. We only have 6 weeks of school left and about a month, 2.5 months of school. And so we think that number is pretty solid, $3.5 million loss. Next year, based on everything we've heard from different quarters, looking at it in different ways, we expect another $4.5 million loss.
Okay.
So we're looking at an $8 million cut
Right.
in our budget over these 2 years. At this point and so far, that is within our margin of error on what we can expect as a budget. So if those are the cuts we get, then we can enter next year without massively disrupting anything, with basically minor changes and adjustments. The main adjustment is how we hire people.
Right.
We're going to hire teachers this year, but we're going to make sure that we hire the right number. When you face a crisis like this, you know you're going to have it. Anytime oil prices are higher in Oklahoma, you better be saving some money up.
Right, right.
Because you know it's going to happen.
Right.
And that's kind of where we are right now. I hope next year, right now I'm thinking more about the year after. Next year is in the bag. We're going to face it. We're going to get through it. It's the year after now that is my focus.
And we talked a little bit in the last segment about closing schools. It seems like that's something that, well, I mean, people who've lived in Lawton long enough to know there's a lot of neighborhood schools.
Right.
And that some of them are small and some of them have been in places that maybe the neighborhood has evolved around them to a spot, kind of like you're talking about the changing nature of what Lawton's population is, where in the back of your mind you have to drive through some of those neighborhoods sometimes and you go, wow, that one's still here. I wonder what the population looks like there. That's got to be on your radar screen, I'm guessing, at some point.
Right.
Is it on the near-term radar for you?
There are no discussions right now of closing schools. We are probably at the right spot we need to be. One thing, as the board pursues a bond, and we're working in that process to decide if we're going to have a bond, we think it would be, we're exploring the option of doing a demographic study before we do any further changes like that. And that would involve trying to decide where the growth will be, which neighborhoods, how much, or maybe how much shrinkage to expect in the district before we make any more decisions like that. But right now, there's no discussion of closing any schools.
That would seem to be a difficult thing to do in terms of trying to project if you did close them down, or how you'd and where you would place another school. I mean, it's kind of like a fire station or whatever. You kind of want to, you almost have to be ahead of where the growth is going to be, but it's difficult to project that. But hopefully your study will determine something like that. Let's talk about teachers. You talked about it in a little bit. We've been talking about a teacher shortage for a long time.
Right.
And there's not enough teachers around, and yet then whenever you have that budget crisis in terms of, well, we may have to let some people go, you're in a spot now where attrition kind of happens, and maybe that kind of helps things out in terms of personnel-wise?
That's what's helped us so far.
Right.
You know, we have a tremendous crisis in the colleges with fewer people going into education. But right now, we've been blessed. Our staff has done an incredible job. Our principals, I mean, you just can't credit one person. It's a team approach with making sure that our teachers have been in the classroom. Matter of fact, having a 100% highly qualified teacher rating from the state in a district our size, when other districts our size have classrooms that don't have qualified teachers, that's a huge thing. That's a thing to celebrate in this district. I'm very proud of that, proud of our staff for doing that. I do anticipate we're going to have challenges filling some holes, but we did it the last 2 years in a row, and I think we'll do it again. I'm confident that our staff, they're working very hard in recruiting teachers to Lawton.
And they have, I mean, at least the state has provided that way for that emergency certification process to be able to dip into. I mean, the school, I'm sure, has used it to some degree, but maybe not as extensively as other districts in the state.
Fort Sill's been an incredible resource. We have a lot of spouses, a lot of staff that come from there. The emergency certification allows us to put people who are qualified, but who have not done, in most circumstances, they're qualified. They just haven't done all the paperwork. That allows us to get a good person in the classroom, and then we work through on those, the paperwork issues. And so that's helped us.
Right. You mentioned talking about the bond and where we go from here on that. At the centerpiece of that whole discussion is Eisenhower Middle School. For people who remember the story on that, the building is starting to deteriorate to some degree. It's not unsafe for the students to be in, but there's clearly some structural problems that need to be addressed. That process started quite a few months ago. We're still a long way, I guess, from being finished with it, but kind of bring us up to speed on where we kind of sit with the Ike Middle School situation.
Well, in a nutshell, first I need to address the safety issues. Since we've had the engineer and architect looked at it, we do monthly measurements and monitoring of the building. The building is safe. It's just old and not worth putting any money into.
Right.
At our recent special board meeting we had, the board, in their discussion, no formal action, but it was pretty clear that the board intends to pursue a bond to replace Eisenhower Middle School. Those were the comments, that was the consensus. Again, there was no formal action. So we're moving as a district to prepare a bond, and the center focal piece is to replace Eisenhower Middle School. We've got to replace, we need a school on the west side. It just is important. That process, we'll need the support of the community. We'll have to be smart on how we do this, but I do believe this community will respond according to the needs of our children.
You'd mentioned a bond in the last break, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the possibilities with Ike Middle and that kind of thing, but we had a recent bond where the school voters approved some expenditures there. Why don't you bring people up to speed on where that money went? There were some buses that were involved in buying it. There were some technology upgrades. So just kind of let people know about how that tax dollars were spent.
In 2014, the voters thankfully approved to renew an existing bond, about $2.9 million per year. A little bit of that goes to buses, but the bulk of it goes to educational needs and facilities. In the past 2 years since we've gotten it, we've completed the roof at MacArthur Middle School, which is a roof you could see through from the parking lot. Added, completed the heating and air conditioning at Whittier Elementary School, as well as Hugh Bish. Those were 3 leftover projects from the 2004 bond that the district just ran out of money. So we're trying to complete those. With the other half of the money, we've put close to $2 million in the classroom with supplies over the same amount of time. And I just in the last 3 weeks met with our principals and asked them to prepare their first textbook order. And I want people to understand, for the first time in at least a decade, we're preparing a textbook order. And that could not have happened if the community had not supported us with a bond. In addition to the bond, we have the sales tax money, which was also later in 2014. With that money, if you drive by Eisenhower High School, it's starting to look like a gym. New windows, we have new roof, new HVAC, and it was all going out the windows. So now we'll have new windows. It's starting to look like a brand new building. We're preparing bids for 7 new playgrounds for our elementary schools, and over the next 3 years, we're going to replace all the elementary schools. We're going to give them all new playgrounds. Those are things, and new fencing and some other things. those are some things that are working on, in addition to the security upgrades at the secondary schools, new video, new entry systems where you have to have an ID to get into the building, and that will complement the existing elementary entry systems, which we installed 3 years ago.
And that's something that you can't really understate the importance of that, right? I mean, it's sad that that's kind of the technology that we have to employ these days. Back in the old days of mom and dad or, walking into school and just hanging out in the classroom for a while. You can't do that anymore. But it is good to know that the district, again, is being as proactive as possible in terms of spreading that out. When you mentioned the textbooks, that just absolutely rings true, I think, with everybody of going, wow, my kids are using the same textbook
Time to get some new ones.
for math that they did whenever I was there 10 years ago. So, I mean, is there anything to do digitally on that? I know there was a talk for a while, and some schools have tried to figure out ways to not have the actual hard cover and paper textbook. Is that possible, or is that something that you just kind of let the principals kind of work with?
It's not only possible, but it's coming at some point. We just don't know when. Tomlinson Middle School this year is doing a pilot program where they have a one-to-one device, and they're using iPads in that case. And one of the reasons we didn't purchase textbooks last year is the principals. We were trying to figure out how to do the digital, but right now we know we're not ready to do that district-wide. The cost and lots of other reasons. But that is something we know is going to happen at some point in the future. We don't know how or what it looks like. We just know it's inevitable.
Let's talk about Ike Middle again in terms of some of the options that are out there as you guys try to figure out a way to work through the bond. If the decision is pretty much made, and I think it seems to be universal, that you got to get out of that building at Ike Middle no matter what, the question then becomes, do we rebuild another school? And if we do rebuild another school, where does it go? Do we need 4 middle schools? Can we redistribute the students among the 3? All those have been tossed around out there. Kind of where are we on the debate, and are all of those items still kind of on the table? How do you guys plan to work through all of those possibilities?
One of our biggest challenges I've discovered is, since we've been so open and transparent and talking about this in open board meetings, that every idea that has come out has turned into its own little legend. So we're going to, every idea that's popped out has become something we're going to do.
Right.
I've heard suggestions from everything, we need to go to 1 high school.
Right, I've heard that one too.
To we need to go to just having 3 big elementary schools. I've heard everything in between. The important thing people need to realize is that's part of the process. People are discussing. Board members are throwing out ideas. At this point, no formal decisions are made on anything. The only thing we know, the board, I'm not speaking for the board, but based on our last board meeting, the board is pretty much at the point where we know we need to replace Eisenhower Middle School. We need a school on the west side. From there on, there are a lot of decisions that need to be made. We've gotten some preliminary estimates on that building. We know it's going to cost $30 to $35 million to replace that building. In order to do that, the only way a district like this can do it is through a bond election.
Right.
And so we're hoping through our current process, where we have a bond oversight committee. Matter of fact, we're meeting Monday. They meet twice a year, where they review every single purchase.
Right.
They have given us good reviews. We're on track so far.
Right.
We're trying to prove that we're going to be as accountable with every penny as we possibly can. That way, when we do present this next bond proposal, the community can say, we trust the district, we trust the board, we trust our staff, and we trust this group of individuals in the community who is helping report back to us. Because we need to invest in our school district, and we're trying to be proactive and just prove you can trust us. We are going to do the right thing with the money. And in order to prove that, we're inviting a lot of people to check on that.
And I know I'm jumping ahead, but in terms of rebuilding the site, would it have to be, could it be rebuilt on that site, or is the foundation and the ground in that zone maybe contributing in some degree to the disrepair of that building? If that is also the case, is there land that the school district already owns on which a new site could be, school could be built, or would you have to do a land purchase as well?
I think we can do it without a land purchase, and I think there's land in that area that we have access to. I don't think building back on that specific hill is a good idea, and that's just my based. But we have options to replace that building.
Right.
I think we need to replace the building before we need to get a new building, move the kids in, and then tear the darn thing down. And that's be the least stress on students, staff, and parents, if we can move them into a building before we tear the old one down.
We've been talking also about the Eisenhower Middle School situation and the likelihood that a bond will need to be passed, but what that bond will ask voters to spend the money on is still kind of to be determined. As you said, the process has been wide open. can you tell us kind of a timeline in terms of, you said the Bond Oversight Committee is going to be meeting this week about the previous bond. Where are we with the school board and with parents in terms of trying to say, we need to get your input, but at some point, all the discussion kind of has to end and somebody's got to step forward and go, okay, here's the plan. What's the timeline for that?
Around Christmas, the board had a board meeting, and we established the timeline for this semester. Right now, we're on track. We've met with staff. I'm going to be meeting with staff personally over the month of April, but in addition to that, we're going to have some parent and community meetings in the month of April, one at each of the middle schools, or one in each of the sections. So we'll have 3. One for Lawton High section, one for Eisenhower section, MacArthur section, because we want to hear from everybody. That means we will have heard from the staff, we will have heard from the community, we will have heard from the parents, and we will be able to sit down and say, okay, we have the information that we need to make a plan. And hopefully in May, the board can start having some meetings about this is what we need to invest in, this is the direction we need to go, and this is what we think the community will support.
And as far as an election goes, I guess potentially it could go November, but it seems that traditionally February is the month that bond elections happen. Is that kind of the target date for that, or am I making you go out on a limb for that too?
I wouldn't know when the election would be. We will make that decision based on this process. When we have everything finished after April, then I think we can actually sit down, okay, this is what we're facing, this is what we should do.
This came across from the state legislature this past week, a measure to eliminate end of instruction exams. This measure still needing to go to committee. Not even sure how far it's going to advance, but that seems to be kind of a controversial topic. Some people like them, some people don't. Give me your opinion. Where would you stand on that issue if you had to call your lawmaker and tell them which way to vote?
I'm not sure how much time we have, so I'll try to.
We got 3 minutes, so you can fill it all up if you like.
I'll try to be brief. It depends. We can't really eliminate end of instruction exams. We're tied to federal law that says we have to have a certain number of them. The question is, are these exams, do they exist to help schools get better and assess their performance? Or do these exams exist to decide whether a student graduates from high school?
Right.
That's the question for me. We need exams to assess our performance and to see if we're being effective as a school. But whether or not, after 12 years of education, a student should be decided whether he or she graduates based on one test, or even 4 tests actually, on 4 given days in April or May of any given year. I don't know if that's the best approach. We have students that don't pass these tests on occasion.
Sure.
What do? Are we branding them as a permanent high school dropout after that point? I think we can do better for our kids. So the question for me is, why do we do this?
Right.
The number that aren't passing is very small, relatively speaking, to the state. But what are we doing for those students if they can't pass the test? We know that the people mature physiologically, but they also mature mentally at a different rate. I know when I was 18, I wasn't ready for college. I had to wait till I was 21 or 22.
Right.
And so we have the same issue with these students. We have got to realize that not everybody can do a pull-up in 8th grade. Not everybody can do a pull-up when they're a senior. The same thing, not everybody is mature, we know a lot about the physiology of the brain and how the brain functions. We need to really be realistic. Education is an individual art. You have to work with individual students. And so therefore, I would love to see the elimination of end of instruction exams where that's the decider whether a student graduates. I think staff, parents, the teachers, the parents know better whether or not that student's to graduate than this test that is written and administered by people in Connecticut.
We have less than a minute to go. One other thing that the legislature approved recently were the new educational standards. I'm sure you were involved in it. Thumbs up, thumbs down on what has come up with to replace Common Core?
We need standards, and I'm thankful we have them. They're not perfect, but PASS was never perfect either. We're going to review, they can be reviewed every year. I'm glad we have standards. It gives our staff some clarity. I think every year they'll have to be revisited, and we'll get better and better.
All right, Dr. Tom Deighan, we appreciate you taking the time. I know it's been a tough year. I'm going to let you go so you can get back to work and keep your handle on this budget crisis you've been dealing with for a long time. All right, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for joining us, folks. We'll see you next time.
If you have a topic or issue you'd like us to focus on, please write to the address on your screen or fax us at 357-3811. Or you can email us.